The Supreme Court has stepped into a high-stakes dispute over billions of dollars in foreign aid, and its latest move raises questions that go right to the heart of how the U.S. government spends taxpayer money. On Friday, the court issued a temporary order allowing the Trump administration to withhold about $4 billion in foreign aid funding, money that had already been approved by Congress. This was not a final ruling, but rather an emergency order that pauses a lower court's decision requiring the government to release the funds by the end of the fiscal year. The clock is ticking because Congress's authorization for this money expires on September 30th. And what happens between now and then could reshape debates about the balance of power between the branches of government. The underlying conflict is not just about numbers on a budget sheet. It's about who ultimately controls the purse strings of government. Congress writes the laws that allocate money, but the president and the executive branch are responsible for carrying them out. In this case, the Trump administration argued that under a law known as the Impoundment Control Act, it had the authority to withhold some of the funds temporarily, triggering a review period for Congress. Critics countered that the administration was using that process in a way the law was never designed to permit, effectively running out the clock so that the funds could expire before they were ever spent. This maneuver is sometimes called a pocket rescission because of how it delays action until the appropriation lapses. The court's order split along familiar lines. The three liberal justices dissented, with Justice Elena Kagan writing that the court was venturing into uncharted legal territory and that the stakes were extremely high. She noted that this case involves not only questions of administrative procedure, but also the core constitutional issue of how power is shared between Congress and the presidency. In her view, the law clearly allows challenges to this kind of impoundment, and pausing the lower court's order effectively shifts authority away from Congress. The majority of the court did not provide a detailed explanation at this stage, but they accepted the government's argument that the litigation needed more time to play out. Supporters of the administration's approach described the court's action as a significant victory for presidential authority. A spokesperson for the Office of Management and Budget said the order restored the president's ability to implement his policies. On the other side, aid organizations and advocacy groups expressed deep concern. The Global Health Council, which led a coalition challenging the move, said the ruling was a disappointment and warned that the delay means life-saving programs could be disrupted. They emphasized that the funds were intended for humanitarian assistance, development, and global health initiatives that directly affect vulnerable communities. For those groups, the legal arguments are important, but the immediate impact on the ground is what matters most. What makes this story particularly compelling is how many layers it contains. On one level, it's about technical details in federal budget law, the Impoundment Control Act, and the procedures that govern rescissions. On another level, it's about political strategies, with the administration using timing and legal tools to align spending with its policy priorities. And at the broadest level, it's about constitutional checks and balances. Who gets to decide how money that has already been authorized should be spent? Can the executive branch stop funds that Congress approved? Or does allowing that set a precedent that weakens the legislative branch? Before we continue, if you find this kind of clear and careful breakdown of complex issues useful, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss future updates on important legal and political developments. Returning to the case, it's important to underline that this is only an interim step. The Supreme Court has not yet decided whether the administration's action was ultimately legal. What they have done is put a temporary hold on the lower court's ruling, allowing the administration to withhold the funds while the case moves forward. That distinction matters, because the court often issues emergency stays to maintain the status quo, while legal questions are still being debated. In this instance, maintaining the status quo means the funds remain frozen until further rulings arrive. If Congress's deadline of September 30th passes, the money will expire, which could make the entire case moot, and that may have been part of the administration's strategy from the beginning. Observers point out that this dispute could have ripple effects well beyond the immediate $4 billion. If the court eventually upholds the administration's position, future presidents might feel empowered to block or delay spending decisions they disagree with, even after Congress has approved them. If the court rules the other way, it could restrict the executive branch's flexibility in using budgetary tools to shape foreign policy. Either way, the outcome could shift the balance of power between the two branches of government for years to come. In the meantime, aid groups and members of Congress who oppose the freeze are trying to keep attention on the humanitarian consequences. They argue that behind the legal filings and constitutional debates are real people who depend on health, development, and humanitarian programs funded by this money. The administration and its supporters, however, argue that the president must have the ability to align U.S. spending with policy priorities, especially in foreign affairs where flexibility can be crucial. Both sides recognize that what happens in this case could set a precedent, not just for foreign aid, but for the entire appropriations process. The story of this $4 billion in foreign aid is still unfolding. What seems like a technical fight about budget rules is actually a much larger test of how American democracy divides power between Congress and the presidency. It's a conflict being played out in real time, with deadlines, dissents, and decisions that could shape the future of U.S. governance. As the end of the fiscal year approaches, all eyes will remain on the courts, and on whether the money is ultimately released or withheld. Until that decision comes, the questions at the heart of this case remain unresolved, and the outcome will almost certainly be remembered as an important moment in the ongoing negotiation of American checks and balances.